But also, let's talk to David Bray, who's joined us here on stage. David, first of all, welcome, and really it's a thrill to have you on board. We're such huge fans of yours. Give us 30 seconds of your background, because it's all over the place, but what are the couple of things that you're focused on, because you've got so many buckets of expertise. I don't know where you want to start.
Sure. Well, first, Salim, thank you for having me. And my own background, I tend to go to places that are turbulent in nature before people have recognized they're turbulent. So you were talking about Elon Musk, who's spotting trends. I'm spotting trends, but more of the social impact and disruption factor. Joined the CDC's Bioterrorism Preparedness Response Program in 2000, when it was still only 30 people. And actually was scheduled months in advance to give a briefing on September 11th, 2001 at 9 o'clock in the morning as to what we would do technology-wise should a bioterrorism event happen. Of course, 8/34, wow. The world changed. Ended up actually giving that briefing on October 3rd, and the first case of anthrax showed up in Florida 24 hours later in the United States in 2001. So it was pretty busy times. Also spent time working with humanitarian and military efforts in Afghanistan, working with trying to bridge civil liberties and privacy issues with the intelligence community. And most recently, I'm now at what's called the Atlantic Council GeoTech Center, which is focusing on the geopolitics of new technology and data efforts around the world.
So with that track record of like accidental thing, I'm glad we're on a virtual thing and far away from you. And I say that with...
Oh, you don't know. Something may happen today. I'm just saying, I'm showing on your show, so let's see what tomorrow brings.
So, one of the areas that we're focused on is institutional transformation and the intractability and difficulty of transforming institutions. You've tackled that head on. And how do you think about transforming, whether it's the FCC or the global security community or the defense community? How do you even go about this, or how do you think about that model?
So the first premise you have to recognize is every institution, every system is perfectly designed to produce the results you're currently seeing. So when anyone ever says like something is broken or something's not working, please know that somebody somewhere in the institution wanted it to behave the way you're seeing. And if you want to bring change, you need to obviously sort of, instead of dealing on the dance floor, you have to go up to the balcony and say, well, why? Why do they want to behave it this way? Why do I think it's broken? And then you need to figure out the theory of the case of how you go from where you're at to where it is. But, the whole sort of mantra that, government is broken or it's not doing what it needs to be done, it may not be doing what it needs to do in your opinion, but you need to recognize that it's also designed to do what it needs to do right now. And so that empathy for the impact and disruption you're going to bring is the first step that any positive change agent needs to do. The second thing is beyond that is to think about, okay, so now I figured out the theory of the case, why it may be doing what it's currently doing, but I need to change it. How am I going to make this happen? And this is when I tell people, I usually ask people to raise their hands, do you want to be a leader? Usually everybody says they want to be a leader. And then I say, well, what if I tell you that some say the word leadership comes from the Greek word leet, which means to be sent unto death. Now, how many of you want to be leaders? Because we don't reward those that step outside of expectations. We reward those who meet expectations. Elon Musk, you gave the example of him. As long as he's continuing to deliver results, even if he's doing the moonshots, he is recognized as a quote-unquote leader, but really he's actually meeting expectations. It's when he does the sort of the crazy idea, like you were saying, about the Hyperloop or things like that. That's the initial leadership where people are going to say, well, wait, what are you doing? Is this idea worth pursuing? And you've got to have a strategy for how do you build that coalition, especially in institutions, because institutions are built to design to resist any change from any one person. It's got to be a network effect. And especially in today's era, not just with the challenges of COVID-19, the last 5 years we've seen also with the internet, the good news is anyone can print whatever they want. The bad news is anyone can print whatever they want. Misinformation and disinformation is increasingly becoming a way to polarize and divide people as opposed to uniting people to make action. So you've got to have a strategy for how you're going to design that. And then finally, you've got to do experiments to gain the expertise to figure out how to change that organization. There's no textbook, but the experiments you design, the theories of the case, you want to test them small, and if they succeed, go larger and larger, and if they don't work, quickly pivot and try a new experiment going forward.
And I'm going to do a quick shout out here to our nonprofit work we do at Fast Track Institute, where we run these 16-week sprints to transform public sector. So, for example, they were about to spend $6 billion laying down light rail systems in Miami. And they asked me to talk to city council, and I said, why would you lay down 18th century technology in a 21st century world? And Brad Templeton, who will be speaking here, and we have videos of him, came and did a fantastic kind of Brad type comment and said, it's great if you want to lay down rails, but you can run 4 things on those rails. You can run trains or trains or trains or trains. If you want to now have in sensor-enabled roadways, you can have things that look like trains and small electric cars and scooters, etc. And to their credit, we ran one of these sprints, and now what they do is they're doing electric scooters in Miami Beach, ride sharing in the downtown corridor, electric bikes over here. And as something works, and they run a bunch of small experiments, as once they have the evidence-based outcome that it's working, then they merge it in the mainstream. And so it's been a total transformation. I think you've been advocating that approach for quite a long time. So kudos to you. Where are the areas that you're focusing on, and which institutions do you think need the biggest leapfrog today?
So what COVID-19 has done is it's shown a light that was already there, but it's shown it on more brightly, that the post-World War II era of institutions we have, both globally, but also in terms of nations and even local apparatuses, need to be updated. And the biggest thing we're facing is that those open societies that separate their private sector from their public sector right now are at a disadvantage in responding to the pandemic versus those that are centralized, that have no separation from their public and their private sector. And this is an existential issue. Because I value the fact that we have open societies, that we allow freedom of thought. I value that we separate our public and our private sector. But we've got to figure out a way where we can increase the speed of that OODA loop so they can work together as partnerships going forward. And the issues they need to deal with it is first data. We know that the future is data, digitization of society. But right now, you have the choice of either becoming a surveillance state, which I don't think any one of us wants. Surveillance capitalism, not really too hot on that either. Or we've got to figure out this third way that gives people autonomy of choice and the ability to choose when and where they share their data from Internet of Things devices, from their house, their cars, and things like that to improve what they receive. But that's a really big issue that COVID-19 has really shown the light on, because if you look at which governments right now are responding the best, unfortunately, they seem to be right now the surveillance states, which obviously we don't want to be the lesson going forward for the rest of the world.
Yeah,
second,
I think that's good.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Keep going.
I was going to say, second, we need to address food. Food, with the GeoTech Center, we got early on back in March, again with my own experiences with bioterrorism preparedness and crisis response in turbulent environments, food is essential. And so we did analyses where we said if you had to close borders and you had to rely on food just internal to certain countries, which countries would be the most problematic? Turns out several countries, including those that unfortunately were already hard hit because they were oil producing and the price of oil has dropped so low, they're going to have famine. And this could be regional, or it could risk becoming a global famine depending on how bad it gets. So we need to figure out how we apply new technologies and data, and even more importantly, new ways of coordinating between the industry sectors and the government sectors to make this happen. Because it can't just be something where you say, let the United Nations take care of that, or let some other world government take care of that. It's got to be industry coalitions mobilizing to improve digitization of supply chains, making sure that actually the places that are producing food can get it to market. And then how do you do the distribution in a way that's consistent with the reality that COVID-19 might last another 2 or 3 years? But I raise that because the food problem could be as bad, if not worse, than what we're seeing with the pandemic. And then third, the last thing I would say, and then I'll turn it over to you. The last thing I would say is we need to actually figure out a way to instrument the planet to be aware of future pandemics, future waves of COVID-19, but also other environmental distress. We need to be monitoring wastewater. We need to be monitoring the air. And this was a pitch that I actually made back in 2013 to the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And at the time they said, that's great, but pandemics are a low probability event. Can you come back to us and make a pitch again 3 or 4 years from now? And of course, here we are now. But anyway, that said, I raise that because we could instrument the planet so that we don't have to rely on world governments to let us know if a pandemic's happening. It could be other things as well. Our weather patterns changing, our food distributions changing. And this is both sensors that are monitoring, say, wastewater in the air, but it's also recognizing with commercial satellite technologies, we know hedge funds are looking at counting cars in parking lots to figure out if a store is being frequently traveled or not. Could we also allow those same patterns of life to inform if something odd is going over here that requires us as either a region or as a world to mobilize for the benefit of all?
So I think all of those areas are powerful, especially that last one where if you can instrument, then you have the data to act on. and then and you can act quickly, as opposed to today where we're not doing enough corona testing and we're kind of groping blindly in the dark in many countries, and it's kind of a disaster in many countries around, because you just don't know how you're going to open it up. And Sonal Shah pointed out that this is a healthcare crisis first that's brought on an economic crisis. So if you don't solve the healthcare crisis, you can't restart the economy. It's just so obvious in terms of how we're thinking about the world. David Bray, can you be with us at the breakout sessions where people can ask you more questions?
I will, and there's two last things I want to say that I would just want to leave with people. Is the most powerful thing that any change agent can do, whether operating in industry or in a public sector or any type of life, is to ask, why are we here? That gets to the point that you're saying, is oftentimes legacy institutions forget why they're there, or why they're there is changed because of the nature of technology. So asking, why are we here? And then the other thing as a model going forward is to recognize where in the past things were done with centralized apparatuses to respond. We're now in an area in which we need shared purpose, shared partnerships, but distributed response. And we've got to show a way that open societies and those that separate their private and their public sector can do it better than a centralized approach.
And we heard that from Eva Kaili this morning, the European Minister for Greece, saying that you need centralized solutions, but decentralized implementation. So a very similar concept. All right, David Bray, thank you so much for being with us. More eloquence per minute than most of our folks, I think, and I'm sure you've heard that before. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, bye-bye then. Folks, that was David Bray, who's a former CIO for the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission in the US, and now works with Vince Cerf on the next generation of the internet and other crazy projects. So that's kind of a little insight on institutional innovation and how we think about that. We think that for us at OpenEXO, and for me personally, that is the area that I think I'll be focusing on the most going forward, is we've solved the corporate immune system problem. We've even solved public sector, but now how do you solve for the future of education, journalism, dispute resolution mechanisms, because those are very, very slow to change and aren't geared for change. The feedback loop is too long. And so that's where our work will be now, is to focus on tool sets for that type of thing. Because the breakthroughs are there, we have to figure out how to update these old institutions in a radical way. And I think David gives you some sense as to how to think about it, at least.